I'm Bill Evans, and this is More Thoughts from a Tolerant Man. Today, my thoughts are with the members of the armed forces who are very much in harm's way in the Middle East. Yesterday morning, we learned of the crash of a KC-135 aircraft. When my father was in the Air Force, those same planes were used for mid-air refueling of the B-52 bombers he flew. Reports indicate that 6 men were lost in that crash. When something like that happens, it has a way of bringing back memories. When I was 18 years old, our country still had a military draft. Every young man was required to register with the Selective Service System when he reached that age. In fact, that requirement still exists today. If a draft were ever to be reinstated, there is already a registry of eligible men. As my high school graduation approached, most of my friends were heading off to college. For a variety of reasons, that was not the path I chose. To be honest, I had not taken school particularly seriously until my senior year. My attention was focused more on sports and girls than on academics. Ironically, during that final year, I began to realize that I actually was capable of doing quite well in school. But by then, I still wasn't sure that I was ready for higher education. The irony of that decision is that later in life, I would earn a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and eventually a doctorate. But that is another story. I decided to take a different route and join the Army. When a country is at war, a young man who volunteers or who is drafted knows what he is facing. But at that particular time, the United States was not officially at war. Vietnam was in the news, but usually somewhere around page 10 of the newspaper. There was a conflict going on between the North and South Vietnam. And the United States' role at that time was primarily to provide advisors to the South. So when I enlisted on July 31st, 1964, our country was not engaged in a war. But history has a way of changing quickly. Only 2 days later, on August 2nd, North Vietnamese forces attacked American patrol boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. A second incident followed shortly thereafter. And 8 days later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which became the basis for what would grow into the Vietnam War, a conflict that would last more than a decade and ultimately claim the lives of nearly 60,000 American soldiers. Needless to say, this was not exactly what I had signed up for. As I recount in my book, I was fortunate enough to spend much of my service stationed in Korea rather than Vietnam before finishing my 3-year tour of duty in the United States. Military service has always carried uncertainty. Young men and women who put on the uniform understand that possibility. They hope they will never have to face the worst of it, but they accept that risk exists. Today, we no longer have a draft. The men and women serving in the Middle East are there voluntarily. They chose to serve their country. And while every one of them knew that danger was part of the commitment, I doubt that any of them expected that possibility to arrive so suddenly. So, today my thoughts are with those service members and with the families who wait and worry back home. And that's the thought from a tolerant man.